Hello everyone. Welcome to this S3 ICT class on CSS. I included this image of the CSS logo because it's kind of useful to be familiar with it, as you will see later on. Just a minor thing, but it's good to know that this stands for CSS. Okay. Let me just give you a recap of what we've seen until now before we go into class proper. First, remember that you need to have your HTML/CSS file ready. I mean the HTML file where you've been doing your internal and inline CSS coding. So your web page has to be something like this. You need to have a picture, an H1 there, a description, HR, you don't see it here, but there's a space, a line break, and then 3 lists. Okay. Now, let me go back to the PowerPoint. In the previous classes, we've talked about inline CSS. If you remember, that means that you go into your code, and if you want to change one particular element, you look for the line that contains that element and you change the attribute there. Okay. This is useful to a certain extent, but it's kind of tedious because you'll have to look for each element each time it occurs, and then you'll have to modify each occurrence of that particular element. So you can imagine that it's not only tedious but repetitive. And of course, it's error prone because the more things you need to change, then there's a greater likelihood that you will make mistakes, you will make typos. We've also seen internal CSS. This this saves you a little bit more time. And if you remember, if you're going to use internal CSS, you'll have to do it within the head tags, within the whatever you type in. As you can see, it has to be within the opening head tag and then the closing head tag. And you have to start with the style tags here, the opening and the closing. If we go to Atom, it's quite clear. Let me just remove the comment there. Okay, at least part of it. You see that the style tags and everything in it are actually within the head tags here and there. Okay, so in this particular instance, what we tried to modify was this element, the body. We changed the background color using a hex value that I got from colorhunt.co.co. So if you go back there, see it's the same thing. I'm gonna save that and then go to my personal web page. I'm gonna refresh, and it has changed. It has that particular background color. Okay. As you can see, the HR has also changed just because of the inline CSS that I've applied here. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now take a look at this. Remember also that I gave you a task last week that was to modify this element, the HR, the horizontal rule, or the line that you can see here. Normally it should go all the way from one end to the other. Okay, now let me go back. What we did then was to change the background color of the HR to white and modify the border style. If you remember, usually the HR already has a default border style, but we modified it, so we removed it by typing this in border style none. So what happened? If you remember, if you did that, you won't see the horizontal rule anymore. Why is that? And this is very important because most of the things that appear on your website are boxes. So if you apply this border style none, that means that you got rid of the box around the horizontal rule. Okay, this means that the HR no longer has sides, and so the lines around the HR, because it's a box, they're no longer visible. Okay, I hope that is clear. Now, like we said before, if you apply this border style none, that means that you got rid of the box. So the lines around the HR have become invisible. The HR is a rectangular box, and by default it has a border and a default border style. If you remember, that's called inset. And that border also has a width, which is 1 pixel on all sides. You can see that if you go to W3 Schools, one of the resources that I mentioned at the beginning of our discussions about CSS. So W3 Schools here, if you scroll down and look for it, this is about all the different elements, HTML elements, which you can modify with CSS. If you scroll down and go to HR, you will see that it has, normally it would have default attributes, and the border style is inset, as we've seen before, and it has a default border width, which is 1 pixel. Okay, so coming back to our PowerPoint, when we apply the border style none, this attribute, that means that the HR box became 0 pixels high, so it became invisible. It didn't have a width, or it didn't have a height. Okay, so it on your web page it became invisible. Now moving on. Now, if you remember, it's not that we want the HR to become invisible. What we actually want is a different kind of horizontal rule. I showed you this before. I don't know if you remember. We're trying to emulate, to copy the HR that we can see on this web designer's, web developer's personal web page. I don't know if you see that, but that's an HR. You see, there's a paragraph here and then a heading, but they are separated by dots. They're barely visible. Maybe I can make that bigger. As you can see, no, that has disappeared. It comes back. There you are. There, here. Okay. So what we need to do is actually change the situation with the HR, with the horizontal rule. So we have to undo its invisibility. So what we're gonna do is to try to change that. If you go to devdocs.io and look for height, you will see that height here as an attribute, it specifies the height of any HTML element. Basically, that translates to if you change the height, then you're changing the height of a box. As we said, most of the things that you see on your web page are boxes. Okay, so let's go to devdocs.io. Here we are at devdocs, and see, we can click on CSS. That you see that icon there, that logo, height, CSS height. What do we see here? Let me see. Yeah, height CSS property specifies the height of an element. So you can change the height of an element there in terms of pixels, as you can see, like this. Height, colon, 120 pixels, then semicolon. If we come back to our code, what you can do now is to test that out. You can type in height under HR. Remember, you're still within style, the style tags. You're no longer concerned with the body for now, but you're modifying still the HR. So what you type in has to be within the curly braces there. So type in height colon 2 pixels and then close it with a semicolon. That's important. As you can see here on my personal web page, like I said, because the background color of the HR was the borders, the color of the HR was white, and we removed the default style, so it's not visible here. If you look at the code, I'm still here within the head tag style and HR. I put in the height. Let's see what happens. I'll save that. Once you return to the web page, you can see that the HR is visible again. It stretches from end to end from one side of the screen to the other because it has a particular height. Okay, can even zoom in. Is that visible? Yeah. So you can see it has a particular height. Okay, coming back now to the PowerPoint. Like I said, if you saved your file and you refreshed your web page, your browser, you would see the white lines because the HR is visible again because the HR gained dimensions. But this height property is not unique to the HR, as we will try to. I will show you in another video what I mean by this, that the height is a property, an attribute that's not unique only to the element HR. So for now, I'll stop here and I'll see you in the next video.